Hello and welcome to Study Sessions, the English Literature and indeed now English Language revision podcast from St. George's. My name, of course, is Mr. Boff, and in this first episode, focusing on English language, we are going to look at week 2 in the exam preparation booklet and specifically the paper 1 question 5 descriptive writing task. So what I'm going to do in this episode is work through this task, this homework task, step by step. And I'm going to be using the AQA writing process, recommended writing process, to guide us. Before we dive into planning, writing, thinking about the stimulus image, though, I just want to cover 3 golden grammar reminders. It's then after that I'll take you inside the planning process. So not just what to write, but how to think when you're planning. And then after that, we'll build the description paragraph by paragraph together. So the idea is that you listen to this whilst you have your exam preparation booklet open, and it's going to give you lots and lots of guidance in addition to, and obviously this is designed to complement all of the guidance and support that your normal classroom teacher is providing you with. But before we get to any of that, let's go through those 3 golden grammar reminders. So, number 1, why we write in third person. So when you're writing descriptive pieces like this, it's always best to use the third person perspective rather than first person. What do I mean by that? So first person, we might write something like, I saw the train in the distance, or I felt nervous about the journey ahead. Third person, though, we would write something like, the train jolted forward, the passenger's hand tightening on the seat. Why do we do this? Why do we use third person rather than first in our descriptive pieces? Well, we use third person because a third person narrative perspective feels more controlled, more literary, and also crucially allows you to zoom in and out, a little bit like a camera. So it lets you show some really small details, really zoomed in details, but then you can also pull back in third person to show the bigger picture. If you write in third person, you're limited by that kind of individual human perspective, and it doesn't lend itself to the style of writing that AQA want when it comes to descriptive writing. Okay, second golden grammar reminders. We are writing in complete sentences, not producing fragments. So I want to give you a really common error. This has happened in my class, and it's probably replicated in lots of classes, not just at St. George's, but around the country. And it's this. Students write fragments. They write things like, the sun shining down upon the sea. Hang on a second, that's not a full sentence. Why? That's because every sentence needs a subject, okay, who or what the sentence is about, and then we have a verb, that is the action, and that's what we mark in English for tense. So, for example, in this sentence or fragment, we've got a subject, the sun, okay, so the sun shining down upon the sea. But then we've got the wrong verb form. We've got shining, which is a present participle. And what it's missing is what we might call an auxiliary or helper verb. Was shining is what we want. So very straightforwardly, we'd write something like, the sun was shining down upon the sea, rather than the incorrect fragment version, the sun shining down upon the sea. You can hear, as English speakers, it doesn't sound quite right. It feels like something is missing, and something is missing. It's that helper verb was. Now, fragments like this are called sentence fragments, and the example I've given you is actually a participle phrase fragment, the sun shining down upon the sea. And students write these because they think it sounds really descriptive. So if you are using a sentence that has a word like shining in it, okay, one of those present participles, just check whether you've used that helper verb was. If you've not, it's probably a fragment and it's probably incomplete. It often helps to actually read the sentences out loud, read your entire description out loud, and you can often hear these errors, these little mistakes, much more easily than if you're just trying to read them off the page in your head. And then the final golden grammar reminder is all about staying in the past tense. So, one of the things that AQA routinely points out is that students often incorrectly leap or jump around between tenses. So, for example, they write something like, the train rolled out of the station, steam fills the air. Now, this is wrong. It's grammatically inconsistent. The train rolled out of the station, past, steam fills the air. Oh, suddenly we're in the present. It doesn't make sense. It makes it very difficult to understand when is this all happening in time. If we just stick to the past tense, everything is far more consistent. And obviously, consistency in our writing is key. So rather than writing the train rolled out of the station, steam fills the air, to correct that, we simply do one small thing. The train rolled out of the station, steam filled the air. So fills, marked for the present tense, becomes filled, past tense. Steam filled the air. So, as I've said, consistency is key. Make sure, please, that we stick to the past tense throughout. Okay, in this next section of the episode, we're going to be thinking about how to generate ideas. Generating ideas is really, really key before we can even start thinking about planning. So, what I want us to do is slow down, and I'm going to talk you through how we can actually get to the plan. Now, this is the part that students often incorrectly skip. They often want to dive straight into writing. But remember, really great writing, strong writing, comes from strong planning. So we've got the picture of the train and the viaduct. That's a sort of bridge-like structure that we can see. Okay, we've got the image in front of us in our exam preparation booklet. Here's how I think when I look at the exam picture of the train, this stimulus image. So the first thing I start with is observation. That is, what is literally there in the picture? So what can I see? I can see a train on a viaduct. I can see smoke. I can see mountains in the background. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, right, well, I can see a train on a viaduct. That's good. That gives me movement. I can see the fact that the viaduct obviously is raised well off the ground. We've got mountains and so on. So I've got height, and the mountains in the background, I've got landscape. These are all good starting points. So in my head, I'm already thinking, right, we've got movement, we've got height, and we've got landscape. These are really good starting points. Then I go from observation to association, or to put it more straightforwardly, what does it remind me of? Okay, what are these various things that I can see remind me of? Now, the viaduct makes me, obviously, as I've said, think of height, which might make me think of, I don't know, something like the fear of falling. The smoke that I can see, and obviously the fact that we've got a steam engine, a steam train, that makes me think of the Industrial Revolution. But also the way the smoke dissipates into the sky also makes me think a little bit about the way that maybe memories can fade. The mountains in the background, obviously that's forming the landscape. The mountains remind me, well, mountains are often mysterious, okay? But they are also, thinking back to year 10 and thinking of the prelude, they're often symbols of nature's power. So again, okay, well, I've got the viaduct, the smoke, the mountains. What can I connect those images to? I can connect them to emotions. Emotions of awe, emotions of fragility, and also, I think, emotions of hope. And then I'm thinking about, okay, well, I've got all of that. That's great. But what about the journey's path, the sequencing of my descriptive piece of writing? So, really easy here because we've got that sense of a journey and of movement. We've got a steam engine, a train starting its journey or following its journey. So, if I follow the train logically, what does a train do? Well, it starts off at the station, pulls away from the station. It's then going to cross the viaduct and it's going to move into the mountains. And maybe after it does that, it's going to come out into the light, perhaps. So there's my structure. And I can make each of those stages a part of my plan and a single paragraph. So train at the station, pulling away from the station, crossing the viaduct, moving into the mountains, coming out into the light. And then the last thing to think about is, what sort of mood do I want to create in this piece of writing? What's the tone that I wish to establish? So I've already mentioned some of those key emotions, awe, fragility, and hope. Okay, so I think I want a bit of a mix of tones. I'm going to start with leaving behind. There might be kind of fear in that, leaving behind something, maybe possibly some nostalgia when we leave something behind in our past and we're journeying away from it, maybe loneliness, but then obviously the image of the mountains being raised up at height on the viaduct. I'm thinking about awe at nature, the vast landscape, and then perhaps ending with hope. I've talked about moving through the mountains, which perhaps is going to be darker, and then moving out of the mountains into a brighter moment. And we often associate brightness with hope and optimism. So my plan, which I've just talked you through, it's not random. It grows from what I can see, and then what it makes me think of, and then, okay, how can I order this in time order? How can I organize these ideas in time order? So using all of the thinking that I've just described, this is just an example, a 4-paragraph plan. Number 1, the train leaves the station. That sense of departure, that sense of change. Number 2, crossing the viaduct, but also fear of being at such a height. Number 3, entering the mountains, shadow, the intense, perhaps even overwhelming power of nature. Paragraph 4, emerging out into the light. Hope, the idea of reaching one's destination and therefore a sense of closure. Notice how each stage flows into the next. That forward movement through the description comes from the connect sentence at the end of each paragraph, something I'll be talking about in a moment when we go through the writing cycle. So, the next section, the writing cycle itself. Remember, in each paragraph, we're going to be using the AQA recommended cycle. I'm just going to remind you of the order. The first part, inform. What is literally happening? Then we move on to describe, sensory detail. 3, reflect, the thoughts and feelings occurring perhaps within people experiencing this moment. 4, react, the physical and emotional response to what is being perceived, what is being seen, what's going on, their thoughts and feelings. How do they physically react? How do they emotionally respond and react to what's going on around them? And then the final stage of each paragraph is connect, which is the bridge to the next stage of our descriptions. So, what's this going to look like in our opening paragraph? So I've said our first paragraph is going to be focused on the train leaving the station and that sense of departure and that sense of change. So we might start with, if we're going to be going with the train leaving the station, we're going to be starting with informing the reader that that's what's going on. So he might write something like, the train jolted forward, wheels clattering as the first clouds of steam hissed into the air. So I'm informing the reader the train has jolted forward, it's clearly leaving the station, the wheels are clattering, the steam hissing. Then we move on to describe. This is the sensory focus, the zoomed in sensory focus. We might then move on to something like, through the window, the platform slid away. Blurred faces waving, hats tipping, voices already fading beneath the rumble of iron. So we've got the rumble of iron, that sensory imagery related to sound, thinking about that auditory imagery, as well as obviously the description, the visual description of the blurred faces, the hats tipping, the sound of the voices, okay? Lots of different senses. We've definitely got sound, rumble of iron, probably feeling there as well, and then obviously what can be seen. And then we move on to reflect. It felt as though every journey began with loss, a leaving behind of what had once been familiar. So you can see we've gone from the external world, the world out there, to an internal emotional world. It felt as though every journey began with loss, a leaving behind of what had once been familiar. Then react. How is the third person focus is obviously going to focus on a passenger. How is the passenger reacting? The passenger sank into the seat, heart quickening with an unnamed energy. So they've reacted to this feeling of loss by sinking into the seat, and their heart rate has quickened. And then connect. Now, this is the one that classes often struggle with. Connect. Listen to this. We want to be able to move the description forward. We're not writing a full story with some kind of big twist at the end or anything like that. It's a description of really a series of moments in time, but we do want this sense of moving forwards in time. Things have to be happening, and we also want to link paragraph to paragraph. So obviously we've gone, the train leaves the station. That's our first paragraph. We're then moving on, the second paragraph, crossing the viaduct. So we need to get the train from leaving the station to be moving out into what we can see in the picture, which is that vast open landscape and the viaduct. So we might write something like, and here's the connect sentence, the final of the 5 within this opening paragraph, and then with a shriek of wheels, the city was gone and the landscape began to open. So listen to that final part there. The landscape began to open. So now what I'm doing is I'm connecting this paragraph to my next paragraph, which is going to be about the viaduct and the open landscape. So this sentence has to give us a little almost teaser for what's going to come next, which we know, okay, because we planned properly, it's the landscape. So we've got that connect sentence. And then with a shriek of wheels, the city was gone and the landscape began to open. Okay, next paragraph. The landscape and the stone viaduct, okay, which is the bridge-like structure that you can see. So in form, we go back to it again. Okay, what can we literally see? What's there? Okay, what's going on? The train curved onto the stone viaduct, arches stretching beneath. We've got a stone viaduct, and the train is kind of curving onto this stone viaduct. Okay, we're informing the reader precisely like what's going on in the scene. Describe. We're going to zoom in. We're going to identify a little bit of the scene that's really interesting. We're going to zoom in. Below, a river flickered like polished glass, while the smoke curled into the open sky. So, we've had inform. Okay, we've got the full scene there. The train curving onto the stone viaduct. Then we've zoomed in. Sensory description. The river flickering like polished glass. The smoke curling up into the open sky. We've gone from now the outside world, the external world, now we're going to reflect. For a moment, it felt as though the world had shrunk to this trembling path between earth and sky. How does the particular passenger we're focusing on in third person feel and their reflection? How do they react as if the world has shrunk to this trembling path? Well, we've already thought about the viaduct being at height, feeling scared about that. So the reaction, well, they're going to feel a little bit unsettled. Okay? It feels just a touch perilous being on the stone viaduct at quite such a height, on a train kind of roaring through it or roaring along that viaduct. The traveller's fingers tightened on the seat as the carriage swayed. Okay, so you can see we've not said, oh, the traveller was really frightened. No, the traveller's fingers tightened on the seat. Okay, we're thinking, okay, reactions. How do people react to the emotional state of fear? Well, they might grip onto something. Okay, if you've ever been in a car with someone and you're not very sort of convinced about the quality of their driving, you might find yourself gripping onto the seat or holding the seatbelt tightly. It's that sort of idea. Okay, so the traveller's fingers tightened on the seat as the carriage swayed. It starts to feel a little bit unsettling, particularly the idea of the carriage swaying on such a perilous path as the one over the stone viaduct. And then we've got the connect sentence. Now, we know from paragraph 2, which is all about the landscape in the stone viaduct, that paragraph 3 is about the mountain. So we need to get from the viaduct to the mountain, and the connect sentence is designed to do just that. And as the last arch fell away, the mountains loomed closer, waiting. So just as I did, listen to my other connect sentence from paragraph 1. And then with a shriek of wheels, the city was gone and the landscape began to open. The connect sentence for my new paragraph, paragraph 2, and as the last arch fell away, the mountains loomed closer, waiting. Okay, the mountains loomed closer, feels ominous. They're waiting, again, feels rather ominous. We're almost personifying the mountains there, this sense of threat and perhaps even danger and anxiety about entering the mountains. But we mentioned there's mountains coming. Okay, so we're connecting this paragraph to the next paragraph, which is all about the mountains themselves. And so, because of the previous connect sentence, and as the last arch fell away, the mountains loomed closer, waiting, that allows us to shift to a new location, which is, of course, as I've said, the mountains. Let me go through again: inform, describe, reflect, react, connect. So, we're going to start with inform. Where are we now? The track carried the train deeper into the mountains, where shadows clung to the slopes. Now, we've spoken lots about description and accuracy in description and ambition in description. One of the things that I want you to remember is that sometimes when we think description, our mind goes to adjectives, but actually, verbs are incredibly powerful when it comes to description. Shadows clung to the slopes. All of those connotations that we have for that word clung to the slopes, that word clung there, okay, that sense of desperation, that sense perhaps of fear, all of those connotations make the shift into the mountains rather more unsettling. Okay, describe. So we're describing what can be seen now. We're going back to that sensory description. We've had inform, where are we? We're deeper into the mountains. There are shadows. Describe. Peaks rose like jagged teeth, valleys twisted into hollows, and the sun struggled to break through the cloud. Now we've got that word struggled, verbs again. The sun struggled. Okay, that sense of difficulty, it's a word that also personifies the sun. Its sense of desperation, difficulty, trying to break through those clouds, the mountains, a place where shadows are clinging. Then reflect. We go into the mind of one of the passengers. The journey seemed to whisper a reminder: humans were small, fragile, and fleeting. Think back to the discussion at the start of the podcast. We were thinking about the mountains and the way that we can often feel that sense of awe. Think about Wordsworth rowing across that lake, okay, seeing the huge peak, black and huge in the prelude. That idea: humans small, fragile, fleeting. They can be overwhelming. React. So we have that thought. The journey seemed to whisper a reminder: humans were small, fragile, fleeting, reflecting on the experience psychologically. Now we get the physical reaction. A shiver ran through the passenger and the coat was pulled tighter. So the physical reaction to the reflection that humans are small, fragile, fleeting. A shiver, and they pull their coat tighter. Okay, and then we're on to the final sentence or the final section of this paragraph. Connect. So we're in the mountains and we know we need to come out of the mountains on the other side. Okay, we're going to be thinking, okay, we pass through the mountains and then it's going to be this open expanse, and the sun that was struggling to peek through those clouds, struggling to break through the clouds, let's have the sun coming out. Okay, it's going to signal an emotional shift in our description. So to connect, we need to go obviously from the mountains and move through the mountains, outside of the mountains, beyond the mountains. Let's do that. And then, without warning, the light vanished as the train plunged into a tunnel. So suddenly we're into a tunnel, and this is going to move us out of the mountains into this open, expansive fields and the kind of broader landscape. So the final section, the final paragraph of our description is going to focus on this shift from the shadowy and cloud-covered mountains into brightness, and therefore we're thinking about hope and optimism and all of the positive emotions that we associate with golden sunlight. Inform, where are we? The train burst from the tunnel, wheels screaming into a blaze of golden light. Okay, oh right, so we've moved out of the tunnel. Now we're going to describe, we're going to zoom in. Fields unrolled like a patchwork quilt, villages dotted the valleys, smoke drifting from their chimneys. So we've got that description of the scene, like a little portrait in words, a landscape in words that we've just described. Next, reflect. We've had the fields out there. We've had the villages, that's the external world, the smoke drifting. Now we're going to the reflection. Hope swelled, a memory of home, of endings and arrivals. There's that psychological reflection. the feeling of hope. As always, when we have a psychological reflection, that internal mental reflection, we then have a physical reaction to it. The react sentence, the react section, the traveller leaned forward, smiling, ready for whatever lay ahead. And then finally, the ending. Now, we've had a journey. We could, if we wanted, have really the journey coming to a close. I'm going to leave it a little bit more open than that. Here's my connect sentence, which is going to really broaden out to a broader, almost sort of thematic reflection on what have we just experienced. The journey, it seemed, was not just across land, but towards something long awaited. And I've not mentioned what that is. We could mention what it is if we particularly wanted to, but I've left that open. I've left it ambiguous. It's going to draw the reader in. It's also going to get the reader to reflect, well, what is it that was long awaited? Why do people go on these sorts of journeys? And it's a journey that's not just about moving physically through space and time, but it's that movement towards perhaps a relative, some human connection, relationship, okay, those sorts of ideas. And that's what I wanted to get at in my final connect sentence. So each of our paragraphs moves through that cycle: inform, describe, reflect, react, connect. And so as I wrap up this podcast episode, the first really focused on English language, I just want to recap some golden rules. The first one is always make sure we're writing in third person. Check, please, that every sentence has a subject and a finite verb. We really want to avoid fragments if we don't intend to include a fragment on purpose. And your teachers will be teaching you more about how we can create fragments purposefully and why we might do that, and we will maybe address that in a future episode. But what we don't want are those sorts of fragments like the one I gave you the example of at the start of the episode, the sun shining down on the scene, okay? The sun was shining down. We want to be careful with that. Stay consistent, please, in the past tense. Avoid those random shifts into the present. It can be really, really easy to do that if we're not paying attention to our tense. And then generate ideas by observing what we can see in the stimulus image. Obviously, this is the one of the train going over the viaduct. What do we associate these things with? How can we sequence it in a logical way? And what sort of tone and emotional mood are we trying to achieve? And of course, finally, as I've just said, that AQA cycle, that cycle in every paragraph: inform, describe, reflect, react, connect. So your job now for your homework over the course of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, your job now is to take this approach, slow down your own thinking, and narrate to yourself how you are planning before you ever start writing. This is what professional writers do. They don't just write, they think about how they are going to write. And so that's it for today's episode of Study Sessions. Remember, descriptive writing is about far more than just pretty or clever sounding words. It's all about guiding your reader, in this case, of course, it's going to be the examiner or your English teacher, through a journey step by step. And that begins with guiding yourself through the thinking and the planning process. Good luck and happy writing.